Story 1. Worked at a place where the chief executive officer's nephew was hired straight out of college as a senior manager. He had no experience and no clue what he was doing. He literally searched online for half his job during meetings. Meanwhile, qualified people were passed over. Morale declined rapidly. It was a masterclass in how not to run a team. Story 2. I worked at a large, well-known, reputable company years ago. A college student applied for the company's internship program and was denied. However, it turned out his parents were close with the chief executive officer, and he made my team take the student on for the summer even though we were not participating in the internship program and had no real use for him. Turned out he was lazy and unproductive. He showed no interest in doing any actual work. All the interns were supposed to complete a major project to present to the company at the end of the summer, and he completely opted out of it. The worst part was that the student did not even realize he got the internship through nepotism. He genuinely believed the program had found a role that suited his interests better than the one he had originally applied for and been declined. He thought it was great luck. Years later, at a different company, we had another internship placement where the student's parents were friends with the chief executive officer. But this student was very aware of his privilege and was actually a great worker. Story 3. I worked for a heating, ventilation, and air conditioning company. My helper was a wealthy kid whose family owned a local business. At the end of every week, we took the metal from our jobs to the scrapyard, and the owner collected the money. The kid helping was provided a company truck, which annoyed me since he was essentially my taxi and gopher. At the end of 1 week, the truck was full of scrap. The following Monday, he picked me up, and the truck was empty. I asked where the scrap was. He said that after dropping me off, he dumped it at the shop, which we sometimes did. I got in, put my coffee in the holder, and found a folded-up receipt. It was for a scrapyard from Friday, shortly after he dropped me off, showing over $400. I held it up and confronted him for lying and stealing, which put me at risk. I called the manager privately and told him I had no part in it and needed the job. The next day, the manager informed me they could not do anything because the kid's family business would cancel contracts with them. Thanks for being honest, though. Story 4. Not the worst case, but it is a funny story. The chief executive officer's son was hired to do some painting, and one of my staff asked me if he was Federal Bureau of Investigation or Central Intelligence Agency, because they thought it was really suspicious that he had been painting the same spot for the past 4 to 5 days. They thought he was pretending to work while on a stakeout. Story 5. I did this man's taxes. His father, who works in the financial industry, gave him a job right out of college. He was earning $10,000 per month just for existing. He quit because he didn't like waking up in the morning, according to his version of events. He was doing nothing for $120,000 per year and couldn't even do anything because it was too much trouble. He likes partying, so he sleeps until noon. He said he took responsibility for this and admitted his failure because then he could stay in the in-law suite, as I understood. I'm sure the people at the office were glad he was gone. Story 6. I worked at an ornamental iron manufacturing plant. The youngest son of the owner was careless. He poured molten aluminum into cold, wet molds that had been sitting outside. They exploded and severely injured his face. Story 7. I worked at a very popular 5-star restaurant when I was 21, and the owner hired his 19-year-old daughter as general manager. It was absolute chaos. She gave everyone vacation time whenever they requested it, even when it overlapped, so there was no coverage. She showed up hours late and made herself free food around the clock. If guests complained about anything, she would tell them that it was their problem, not hers. When her friends came in and one of us was serving them, she would comp their entire bill so we wouldn't get a tip. This amounted to hundreds of dollars worth of food and drink and hours of a server's time with no compensation. The restaurant went out of business shortly after that. Story 8. A friend who worked for her father as a safety supervisor in the steel mills graduated college with a 2.1 grade point average in general studies and was upset that she needed to wear a hard hat and steel-toe boots because they did not fit her style. Story 9. A man who ran a dealership had his daughter conducting new vehicle orientations. She would get into the new car with every client and give a tour of the vehicle with a disinterested attitude and a flood of incorrect information. It was very strange. Story 10. Small clinical trial company with about 100 employees. All 5 doctors brought in their teenage children for paid summer internships. The entitlement from these kids was obvious. Their hourly rate was higher than our entry-level new hires, who require a 4-year degree. It was clearly a way to funnel company money to their children. Getting these kids to do anything functional was a nightmare and slowed overall company productivity because we had to supervise them. Someone tried to explain that metrics were low due to time spent with the interns. However, human resources and one doctor expected their numbers to improve, given the extra help. They were disconnected from the reality and consequences of bringing in and training uncaring, consequence-free labor. Story 11. The 20-year-old, whose entire job history consists of an internship and mowing lawns as a teenager, is now the head of United States counterterrorism. Story 12. The wife of a deputy superintendent was hired as the principal of one of the largest schools in the city. She performed so poorly that nearly her entire staff either quit or requested transfers. Twice. She micromanages areas that do not require oversight but is very lax on important matters. She plays favorites with both staff and students and shows a strong dislike for special education students. She threw a fit when a self-contained special education class was placed in her school, and it was removed after only 1 year, despite her school having the highest number of students needing those services. Additionally, it was reported that she used paid time off fundraiser money to purchase items that only her favorite teachers could use or to fund field trips exclusively for her preferred classes. Story 13. I quit after the owner hired his nephew and asked me to train him. The nephew left his pay stub in the copier, and I discovered he was making almost twice as much as I was. Story 14. My current head of human resources is the chief executive officer's son. He is also a convicted child molester, was arrested for faking a hate crime against himself, and recently completed an 8-month stay in rehabilitation. Story 15. The CEO I worked for, whose father owned the parent company, insisted on being part of the design review. Then, a month later, he would change his mind about the features he wanted. He didn't understand that sketching on a napkin didn't mean it couldn't be made. It was just a lot of nonsense. Then he put everyone on unpaid leave during the coronavirus pandemic for months, then cut my pay to return. He was surprised when I left the company. Story 16. I worked in the quality assurance department for a call center as a team manager. Every other department head above me on the organizational chart had the same last name. I frequently had to attend client meetings that were well above my pay grade to explain what we do, how we do it, and what criteria we measure. I left that job to work for a company that turned out to be a big multi-level marketing scam. I was the only member of staff who did not belong to the same Latter-day Saints ward. Story 17. The change management team was given a resume and told to find a position for this person. He was the nephew of someone in upper management, and we were instructed to create a position specifically for him. He was completely ineffective at the job, only offering meaningless platitudes like a motivational poster in every meeting. Despite this, he was promoted rapidly. The ironic part was that on the day we received his resume, layoffs were underway. Good employees were let go as he was brought in. Story 18. There was a man whose uncle was the head of the company and gave him a very easy project manager role straight out of college. He had no experience and no skills. He would show up late, disappear for hours, and still get praised in meetings as if he were a great visionary. Meanwhile, the rest of us were overwhelmed with real work. The worst part was when something went wrong, which happened often, he would simply shrug and wash his hands of it, saying that he was not responsible for the details. Story 19. At the factory where I worked, the owner's daughter was made plant manager after working there in an executive capacity for around 6 months. She was an intelligent and capable woman, but she had absolutely no experience, and her qualifications were in a completely unrelated field. As far as I could tell, she had no personal interest in manufacturing either. She just did her best despite really having no idea what she was doing. The company went under about 18 months later, not because of her employment specifically, but due to many similar decisions. Finally, Brexit, as the company was based in the United Kingdom, delivered the final blow. She is now the general manager of another manufacturing company. So, nepotism works as intended. Story 20. I work as an information technology integrator. Sometimes the project is very large and complicated. Halfway through one of those projects, the construction project manager for the building where we were going to install technology resigned unexpectedly to join another employer. One of the executives of the construction company replaced the project manager with his nephew. This person was very difficult. He would launch into angry outbursts about the smallest issues and was hostile to everyone. Over time, we realized this young man, who was in his 20s and too inexperienced for such a large project, had mental health problems. He would interrupt people with unrelated criticism and seemed to be struggling with the pressure. We eventually called a meeting with the executives and collectively informed them that we would not continue working on the project unless the project manager was replaced. They did not hesitate to fire him because by that time, they already knew he was not fit for the job. Story 21. I used to work at a place with a no nepotism policy. However, the owner's cousin was second in charge, the cousin's wife was in a higher position, her children had all worked there at some point, and the owner's children all held high positions. In my department, there was my boss, her daughter, and her mother. None of them got along. The daughter was technically my subordinate, but I had no authority to make her complete her work. I started a spreadsheet to track our work and found that I was doing 80%. Her mother said, "You're the coordinator, you should be doing more," ignoring the fact that I had other duties outside of the shared work. One day, I asked my boss if she wanted me to ask someone else to help me catch up, since it was 2 p.m., the day before a check run, and I needed invoices processed. Once again, her daughter was absent. My boss called me a liar because her daughter said she was caught up. Took my boss to my office to prove this was not true. My boss made her daughter work all night, even from the hospital, where her son had a seizure, to catch up because she had lied to me. There were never any consequences. The daughter was let go in a layoff, but I know her mother fought to keep her position. Story 22. I knew a guy who was hired at a store owned by his dad's best friend. He was very smug when he told our friend group that he was such a good worker. They made him the store manager in only 3 days. I forgot another one that still bothers me to this day. When I was about 12 years old, I auditioned for a play at my community center and was almost promised one of the bigger roles. Instead, the part went to a kid without any acting experience, and it did not take me long to notice he had the same last name as the people who donated money for the new swimming pool. Story 23, maybe not the worst, but the most recent. A friend of mine has the title administrative assistant, but in addition to supporting a vice president, she also completely runs 2 to 3 huge events for her company. She has been with her company for over 15 years. She has 2 master's degrees and is working on another one right now. She recently found out another administrative assistant who has worked there half as long, only has a high school diploma, and does not have all the extra responsibilities is making the same amount of money. That administrative assistant is close friends with the head of human resources. And thus the job search has begun. Story 24. I worked at a technology company a few years after college. While I was there, the company hired the president's son. He started working in quality assurance. He was seated in a very visible workstation and was always on his phone. Team members complained behind the scenes that no work was coming from his position. 1 year later, he was promoted to quality assurance supervisor. He was the only person in the office without a college degree and had worked on that team the shortest amount of time. Within a month, everyone else on the team had left. The company brought in fresh college graduates to fill the ranks, but the supervisor could not train them because he did not know how to do the job. Issues with clients increased significantly. This was about the time I left, and the company closed down less than 2 years later. Story 25. The chief executive officer of the company I was working for had 2 children. The first was being groomed to replace the previous leader once he retired, and the second was going to be in charge of the sales side of the company. Unfortunately, the first child was self-absorbed and assumed that since he was guaranteed the chief executive officer position, he would automatically know how to do the job. He never paid attention in meetings, had no understanding of how things worked, and assumed that because his father made running the company look easy, it must actually be that easy. Turns out it was not. The previous leader had to return to the position after less than a year, spend several $1 million rehiring employees who had left and replacing equipment that had not been maintained, and invest significant time and energy recovering customers. The first child was demoted to vice president in name only, which is a favorable position if you do not mind having limited professional responsibilities. He earned at least $500,000 a year while doing almost nothing due to his incompetence, and kept that salary after the second child eventually took charge. Story 26. Jaden Smith in any movie except The Pursuit of Happiness, where he was only decent because he was young and had few lines. Story 27. I worked at a family-owned PC repair shop where the owner's child was given a job as a technician and clearly did not know the basics. Back then, in the early 1990s, you had to wire the power switch on the case to the power supply unit with 4 wires. It was simple and even had a diagram on the power supply unit showing how to do it. I had explained it to him at least twice. The child still fried 3 power supply units within 10 minutes, the third one under my direct supervision. I am still not sure how that happened. The owner refused to acknowledge what we observed and insisted it was a bad batch. He insisted we return merchandise authorization the whole lot, even after I wired 2 more units and demonstrated that they worked in front of him. There was no doubt where his child got his lack of knowledge or refusal to admit mistakes. Story 28. I used to work for a newspaper that gave out scholarships to graduating high school seniors. Almost every time, the senior was related to someone who worked at the company, a child of a current employee, a niece or nephew, a cousin, or a grandchild. Clearly, those seniors did not earn the scholarship through their academic achievements. Story 29. I worked at a summer camp, and the director was awful about many things. One issue where I stood firm was when he hired the son of someone from his church. The young adult initially ran errands for us, but we discovered he was disruptive during classes, playing the piano on his own and talking to counselors as if he were an attendant. After a few days, we learned he was touching young girls' legs and playing suggestive music and videos for them. I told the director I would report him to the authorities if he was not removed. Instead, he was moved to the office to surf his phone all day while getting paid. Story 30. Worked at a startup where the founder made his son the vice president of business development, starting him at $325,000 per year, and his daughter the director of human resources. Neither had any experience whatsoever in those fields. The company eventually failed. Big surprise. Also, famous musicians do this way too much. Generally, there is a laughable amount of nepotism in entertainment. They put their talentless kids on albums, try to promote their kids' records, and get them record deals. Even if the parents don't, the kids often try to ride the coattails, like both Lennon children, Julian and Sean. It is not always bad, especially in acting. Colin Hanks is pretty good, and Michael Douglas became a star in his own right, but usually the apple falls far from the tree, and the kids of the famous just end up as hacks. Story 31. I worked for a family-run grocery store where the son of the owner was the head manager and the daughter was the human resources supervisor. It was wild the things they were able to do to the employees because they had no accountability. Then the head manager had a baby with the head shift leader, and it was all downhill from there. Story 32. Co-owner of a company I worked at. His European family asked him to start a North American branch of their business to keep him out of trouble. He was a lifelong cocaine user and was deliberately kept in a minority ownership share by the person who came along about a decade later to bail out the failing business. He was an absolute nightmare to work for, had no product expertise, and actually made things worse because he was a key decision maker. I should have quit years before I did. Story 33. I worked at a place where I had to hire the chief financial officer's irresponsible son as an assistant. He proceeded to stuff coded invoices in his desk drawer instead of processing them and hid incoming invoices, resulting in 120-day past due notices. The final straw was when we discovered he forged the president's signature on a $25,000 invoice. Then he went on vacation with his father and tried to gaslight us into believing he had mentioned it during the interview. When he returned, he claimed he had a tapeworm that was causing him anxiety. When he finally came back to the office, I had termination papers ready for him, but he quit that morning. He lasted 6 months. His father retaliated by being difficult to my department, but we all knew what a failure his son was, and his father was taking it out on us. Story 34. The Trump family influencing United States government policy. Jared Kushner trying to resolve the Middle East crisis. Story 35. I work for a home health agency. A nurse who graduated about a year ago and has been working as a nurse for less than 1 year was just promoted to the executive director position for our branch. People who have been working in this industry for decades will now report to someone with less than 1 year of experience. Story 36. I worked in education through various agencies for a decade. I witnessed extreme nepotism, but the worst incident was when I was teaching in schools through a small tutoring agency. One of my colleagues asked me what the plot of Lord of the Flies was. Further questions revealed that this tutor was the nephew of the agency owner. He had received a D grade in both English literature and language, but he was considered a technology expert. It was good if he was skilled in technology, but this was English tutoring. His children ended up joining my class, and I got in trouble for undermining my coworker. Later, I found out that the technology expert comment was because his aunt had tried to get him an administrative job sorting spreadsheets. He wanted to earn more money, and the tutoring side paid better than administration. They placed him in English tutoring instead of IT because there was no space in IT. He was not even that skilled with technology. Story 37. I do not know if this counts. In the 11th grade, I applied for a free summer program at a top university that was very competitive. It was supposed to be only for rising high school seniors. 3 other very qualified girls from my class applied as well. None of us were admitted. One girl who was a rising junior was admitted. The guidance counselor could not explain why. We were furious. I do not know why or how the younger girl was even allowed to apply, let alone get in above for other qualified candidates. I do not know if she or her parents had any connections. She did not attend that university and did not major in its specialized field. I do not hold a grudge against her. On the contrary, I am very proud of her and what she has become. I am just very confused as to how this happened. Story 38. Betsy DeVos is especially awful. With 0 education experience, she was appointed as President Donald Trump's Secretary of Education because her family gave millions to Republican political action committees. What is worse, that money came from Amway, the most cult-like multi-level marketing company. Their bribery of politicians is the reason multi-level marketing companies are barely legal, operating as pyramid schemes that sell products and recruit new sellers. Note the $2 million donation by Richard DeVos to a Republican organization and several smaller donations to other similar organizations. Story 39. Guy hired his son, and the young boy did not know anything about the work. I learned eventually, though. Story 40. The place I currently work has a staff member whose sister is in a relationship with the boss. This staff member is uncomfortably close to the boss, with whom she has always been unhealthily obsessed. They have bought a pair of dogs together for breeding, as we work with dogs. They have also purchased a house together to rent out. The boss bought a second house, so she moved into the house on the work premises. She is untouchable and is allowed to get away with whatever she wants because she makes the situation uncomfortable for the boss. She behaves like a child, and he is lazy. Story 41. I worked at a hotel, restaurant, arcade, and water park. The owner's grandson was hired as a dishwasher. He was later fired because he did not perform well. The owner also did not perform well. Story 42. In a prestigious company where college students would compete for internships, the managing principal hired his 2 high school children as interns. They were entirely unqualified, had never taken classes in our field, were not helpful, and showed no interest in pursuing our type of work or participating in site visits. This was very demoralizing and frustrating. Story 43. David Beckham's son has been a professional model, chef, and photographer and has published a book. Story 44. Guy inherited a business from his mother. His mother had worked hard and built the business with her late husband. She was a great woman, a solid boss, hands-on, willing to help out, get involved, and listen to the staff. The son who inherited the business had been privately educated and grew up wealthy thanks to his parents. He was entitled but still believed he had worked hard for what he had. He did not care about the mental well-being of the staff and did not hire a replacement manager when one left. Instead, he split the managerial work between a couple of supervisors and a different department head, none of whom were suited for the role. I burned out in about 2 months and quit a month later, halfway through my seasonal contract. Story 45. I worked for a local company that was about 30% nepotism. The owner's son would pretend to be on phone calls to avoid talking to clients. Not well either, he would literally just pick up the phone when it was not ringing and start talking. Or he would jog upstairs when he saw someone about to walk through the doors. The owner's daughter was the payroll person who paid bills, but she would skip paying a $100,000 bill to one of our largest suppliers to pay a bunch of smaller bills that were not due for a month, causing materials to be delayed. The owner's nephew was also unemployable. He would go upstairs to work in the quiet, but when you tried to find him, his car would be gone and he would show back up hours later with some story about having to go to a job site or pick up a sick child. There were also several friends of his children hired who were equally unproductive. Things were never great, but once a few people retired, those of us who actually worked had to pick up the slack, leading to several of us quitting. In my last week, the other payroll person decided to leave as well and told me how much those three were making. I almost walked out right then. Instead, I told for other people. Story 46. A person gets hired and given unimportant assignments where he can spend all day on his phone. He disappears for long periods, takes hour-long lunches while only 30 minutes are allowed, and gets away with it. Eventually, he surpasses others with much more seniority in promotions. After receiving the promotion, he still maintains a relaxed and easy job. It turns out he is very close with a high-ranking executive. Story 47. I worked for a company where they hired the chief executive officer into a senior director role, but he did not do anything other than join a call or two to say some random buzzwords. He legitimately got a $10,000 raise every year. The rest of the company was lucky to get cost of living adjustments. Story 48. A story about someone who was hired because he said in his application that he had attended university. He did, but dropped out or was expelled after about 1 or 2 months. Story 49. Context. Below is a breakdown of a warehouse I worked in, including roles, salary ranges, and the number of employees at this location, Big Blue Box Warehouse. 1. General Manager, $150,000 to $200,000 plus, 1 position. 2. Assistant General Manager, $100,000 plus, 2 people in role. 3. Operations Manager, $90,000 plus, 4 people in role. 4. Area Manager, $75,000 plus, several in role. Most of us in these roles under the general manager had prior managerial experience. Except for one person, Taylor. Taylor was a 21-year-old, fresh out of college area manager who majored in accounting. She was not a natural leader but was good at mimicking other managers and acting experienced. She got every request approved, everything she wanted with no pushback. It turned out Taylor used to be assistant general manager Troy's secretary at their previous company and was engaged, eventually married, to his son. Taylor was promoted and received raises very quickly. It also emerged that Taylor was involved with her boss, assistant general manager Anthony, the entire time. Anthony was married with 3 children. Taylor left her husband and had a baby with assistant general manager Anthony. All of this happened before Taylor turned 25. Story 50. My father-in-law bought his daughter a custom high-end jewelry company, and she markets it by wearing Cartier Love bracelet stacks. I am not sure she knows what she is supposed to be doing. Story 51. The restaurant I worked in had a boss who bought his son a car at age 15 with money he borrowed from a waitress. He then put his son in charge of the bills when that waitress was not working. Tips fell and customers did not return. The son was on the spectrum and had no people skills, just enough to be arrogant. Story 52. I worked with an emergency room doctor who was immature, made poor decisions, and was lazy. We all knew he would not get his contract renewed. I heard he waited his entire shift to close a head wound. He reportedly placed staples without any cleaning, pain relief, or numbing. There were other issues as well. It reached the point where we all wondered why they were waiting for the contract to end. He should have been fired. Finally, he lost control one day over an incident involving not allowing a pediatric patient's parents to visit. The medical director had to intervene and escort him out. It was then revealed that both of his parents were on the hospital board. Story 53. My girlfriend worked for the local Pfizer branch. One day, a girl, a year or two older, was hired in the position immediately above hers without any experience at Pfizer. Over the next several years, she was constantly promoted about twice a year. At some point, we learned her mother is a somewhat known cardiologist. Story 54. Not as severe as some others here. My old boss hired his best friend's baby mama to manage the business's financial aspects. Never mind the fact she came to work crying because she had about $20,000 of personal debt. She couldn't manage money. Everything she did required him to be involved. Before long, it became an open secret that the boss and the woman were sleeping together. The boss was married, and she was still with his best friend. I had been there for a decade and was underpaid compared to my associates by at least $20,000 a year. I finally decided to leave. In my last week, I found that this woman, who had been there just a few years, hardly did anything and was always sneaking off with the boss during work hours, was making a few $1,000s more than me every year. Honestly, forget that place. What a mess. Story 55. When I was in 4th grade, my little league coach had his son bat leadoff and play third base. He neither recorded a hit nor threw a runner out during the entire season. Story 56. I used to work for a market research firm in Southern California. The owner was a talented analyst with a doctor of philosophy in marketing. After I had been there for a few years, the owner's husband lost his engineering job and was brought on as an operations manager. He was basically put in charge of everything. He also had a doctor of philosophy, but his was in engineering. He had no knowledge about market research and even worse skills when it came to managing people or basic project logistics. He was a toxic combination of arrogance and incompetence. Within a year, he had mismanaged the office to the point where everyone was laid off, and all projects were transferred to our sister organization in another state. Story 57. George W. Bush. During his first term, he was heavily influenced by Dick Cheney. He is considered a war criminal along with Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, and most of George W. Bush's cabinet. Story 58. Worked for a real estate company. They owned several apartment buildings, a few office buildings, and a couple of restaurants. A woman was hired as a senior property manager and tried to bring in her own maintenance staff, which did not work. One building had about 200 apartments and was located in the middle of downtown. She decided it was time to replace the building manager, who was a glorified groundskeeper, with a live-in manager who would handle groundskeeping, maintenance requests, and the building as a whole. Did she promote our lead technician with over 20 years of experience? No. She hired her 19-year-old son. He was also given a senior maintenance position, so he earned significantly more than the rest of us. Story 59. The man whose brother-in-law was the director of sales managed our website and told women they should not work and are useless. He was promoted twice in 3 years. Story 60. I worked with the boss's daughter. We were friends at one point. It became apparent that the rules did not apply to her. She came and went as she pleased, often leaving the office to go shopping. She used the office as her daycare whenever she liked, while we were trying to work with a cute but very bored and unsupervised 5-year-old roaming our desks. Her vacations and sick time were never counted as paid time off. She somehow managed to get permission to work from home, even though this was not a job where that made sense. She ruined her work laptop by letting her children play on it unsupervised. They spilled cereal on it and pried off some of the keys. Games and viruses were downloaded. The laptop was eventually replaced with a new one. She took one of the company vehicles on a road trip, used company resources to run her multi-level marketing side business, and tried to get people fired if they disagreed with her or called her out on her behavior. She got in trouble with the non-family chief-level executives because she messed up an order so badly that it cost the company a lot to discover the problem, reorder the correct items, and pay for a rush job before a convention. Another non-family employee resolved the issue, and she threw a tantrum saying, "It's not fair. Everyone thinks she is so perfect." It was something to behold. She had been fired a few times but was always allowed to come back because she maintained that if her parents took her job away, that is, held her accountable, she suddenly did not feel comfortable having them around her children. Story 61. Senator Pete Ricketts, former governor of Nebraska, previously held a prominent position in his father's company. He is mediocre, but with a family fortune in the billions, he gets what he wants. Story 62. Dad created a particular type of company for his son who had just finished his master's degree. Dad was mostly hands-off but occasionally stepped in to pay his son's past-due bills when he received complaints. The son was constantly late paying his contracted employees and inventory bills. Eventually, the contracted employees joined together to sue both the son and the father. Now, their customers are suing them because the son either did not know or did not care to obtain proper permits for construction, and his work contained many shortcuts and poor quality. Dad is shocked because the son promised him he knew what he was doing. Story 63. I was one of 2 interns in the finance department at a fast-moving consumer goods company. The other intern was only there because she was the daughter of someone important at the company. She stayed with the team at the head office while I was sent to the factory finance team. By the end of the internship, we had to present what we had learned to the financial director. Her presentation was awkward because she used a basic PowerPoint template poorly edited and had no tangible content. I sat there watching the presentation, feeling annoyed because I have always disliked nepotism, and that was exactly why. When she finished, everyone was just staring, and the financial director said, "Next." Then I went to present. When I finished, everyone was clapping, even her team at the head office. I smirked from afar as if rubbing it in. I was very satisfied that I had shown them live proof of the difference between a nepotist and someone who actually puts in the work. Story 64. I worked at a company that built closets. The owner's daughter, who had worked in marketing elsewhere, decided after 20 years as a stay-at-home mom to 3 children that she was ready to return to work. A couple of years later, her father retired, and she was chosen to take over. It was not that she was incompetent, but there were many others who had been there longer. Story 65. This is a little different from most stories, but when I was in 7th grade, we had a new history teacher named Ms. Lynch. She was an absolutely awful teacher who clearly did not care much. At the end of the year, it was announced that she would not be back, and we would have a new history teacher the next year. I was good friends with the English teacher's son, and we stayed friends throughout high school and college. I went to visit him and his mom about 10 years after the Ms. Lynch year, and somehow we got on the topic of her. Because we were all adults, I asked directly if Ms. Lynch had been a nepotism hire, and my friend's mom confirmed it. Her dad was an important person in the school district and used that to get her the job. Ms. Hoffman, the teacher who replaced her the following year, was an excellent teacher. She was also supposed to be the original hire the year before Ms. Lynch's father pulled some strings and got her the job. Story 66. Former teacher here. I know of a school principal who hired his nurse's assistant girlfriend. She was not a registered nurse, not an enrolled nurse, but an assistant in nursing, as the school nurse. This was highly illegal, as school nurses are required to be registered nurses in my country. The school included several students with high medical needs such as stomas, type 1 diabetes, and recovering from chemotherapy, which she had no idea how to manage. Several teachers reported this, risking their own professional standing, but that is a separate story. An investigation is ongoing. Story 67. As someone who has never worked with hot metal, this would not immediately strike me as an obvious thing not to do. If cold, wet molds are left out while aluminum is being warmed, surely the training should have repeatedly emphasized that this is a bad idea. Story 68. The chairman's son had his own office and no responsibilities for 6 years. He was paid a competitive salary, received full benefits, and received annual merit increases. Story 69. The woman who trained me at my job was hired because her mother worked for the company. She was fired because she was not working and literally slept at her desk multiple times a week. She was then rehired because her mother worked at the company. Story 70. At my old job, the managing principal hired his recently graduated son from the University of Southern California. His son's football player friends from both the same team and a rival team, his son's girlfriend, and his son's girlfriend's roommate all during the same period. They had no idea how to behave in an office setting and basically ran amok while collecting a paycheck all summer. Story 71. The CEO's son was hired over the summer, between university years, to be a video editor for the company. One of our designers was also a video editor. The son produced some of the poorest quality videos, simultaneously over-edited and lacking sources. This was a significant issue because we were a travel company, and videos showcasing our destinations were very important. I was the social media manager and had to post the videos on social media, but I did enjoy showing the CEO the numerous comments each day calling the videos poor quality. He returned every year and was paid, as we later discovered, double our annual salaries for 3 months of work. Story 72. Anything to do with the Ford family in Ontario. Doug Ford is currently premier of the province, and his brother was the infamous crack-using mayor of Toronto. Doug, an uneducated hash dealer, inherited the business his father built. He nearly bankrupted the company and had to close certain parts of it, such as their Chicago contingent. He and his brother then managed to make their way into city council in Etobicoke and Toronto, causing constant disruptions and unprofessional conduct for anyone paying attention. His brother became mayor and embarrassed any other family with his very publicized drug use association with known criminals and inappropriate behavior, including telling the media that he has enough sexual partners to satisfy him at home. Somehow, Doug became leader of the Provincial Conservative Party, is currently under Royal Canadian Mounted Police investigation for the Greenbelt scandal, and has openly engaged in illegal behavior and schemes, pandering to housing developers who gave him and his business undisclosed sums of money via very open bribes. Their nephew, Michael Ford, is another uneducated benefactor with no real-world experience. He rode Doug's and Rob's coattails into city council and is now a member of provincial parliament. His father is currently serving an 18-year sentence for attempted murder. The attempted murder is unrelated to his son, as far as is known, but it indicates how involved this family is in the criminal world. Story 73. A man who was a vice president at a local bank was hired as a teenager by the president, who protected him from failure. He has spent his entire career there doing very little, including telling the current president that he saved the bank a lot of money by not spending any of the marketing budget. The current president will not fire him because they are friends. He is in his 40s, makes 6 figures, and is not very competent. If he ever gets fired, he will have serious difficulties. Story 74. I worked at a place once. It was a family-owned and operated business. The owner was retired and living in Florida and left his son, owner Junior, in charge as president of the company. Junior was possibly the most dim-witted person I've ever met. The business had 2 main parts. He hired his old neighbor and high school buddy to run one department, which he did mostly competently, but not as competently as he betrayed his buddy's wife behind his back. I was manager of the construction division, which accounted for the majority of our revenue and profits. Junior loved to talk about how hard he worked, but all he ever did was buy equipment at auctions in between trips to his lake house for a 4 to 5 day weekend every week and, probably wisely, delegate all the actual work of running the business to the managers. If he had just stayed away and kept writing paychecks, it would not have been so bad. But when he did come to the office, all he ever did was prattle endlessly to everyone who was trying to work, usually repeating the same stories, or making repetitive comments about how busy we were. He also consistently tried to get me and the other manager to join him in his office for a beer. The money was decent, and the job was pretty easy for me, but I could not get out of that place quickly enough. I was afraid I would start losing IQ points if I had to listen to that man any longer. Story 75. Oh man, I have seen a nepotism baby cost the company millions. One of the owners hired his son, who has worked in our industry and failed miserably. It was bad enough that I knew who he was because my previous company took over one account that he lost, and it was a complete disaster when we took over. So bad that the office had a huge hole in the wall that you could walk through, and it had been like that for months. People worked there every day, too. It was unbelievable. The company I was with, which took that contract, was bought by another company, and that is where the father and eventually the son came in. The father was relatively nice. Honestly, I never had a problem with him. The son had a fraternity mentality, and no one liked him. But since he was the boss's son, no one showed it to his face. The son was brought in at a management level as a senior regional manager. The only reason was that his father was an owner. He did not have any experience at that level. Within the first 6 months, he lost 6 of the 8 very large contracts in the region. He fired people left and right, became a human resources nightmare, and clients did not like him because he did not know what he was doing. I left because I could see where this was going. We were told not to conduct safety training because it was a waste of man-hours. We were told not to hire female managers because they were too emotional, even though I am a female manager. Once, when he was introducing me in front of senior leadership, he said, "I do not even know what your title is." Haha. This upset my boss a great deal. There is much more I could list, but you get the idea. The last I heard, he keeps losing contracts. There are 6 owners in total, and they are all upset with him. He will not get fired, though. His father will not let that happen. Story 76. The plant manager hired a friend to be a shift supervisor. The person had no experience as a supervisor, had never worked in the food industry or in a factory, knew nothing about the product being made, and had no understanding of the machinery. Additionally, he spent most of his time on the patio harassing female employees. Story 77. Zion Marley. Compared to the other Marley children and family members, he sounds like a bedroom reggae producer who just learned how to use autotune. He is truly only supported by the Marley name and the musicians behind him. He himself is not very talented. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.